an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Parable of the Talents, chapters 9, 10, and 11. In these chapters, the worst possible thing happens. I have to be honest, I've read a lot of books for this show. I've read a lot of depressing stuff. This is probably the most depressed I've ever been after reading. This was really rough. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. First of all, thank you very much to Danique for commissioning this episode. I am kind of blown away at how much I should have seen this exact thing coming and yet didn't. Because, spoiler alert, Acorn is attacked. And I knew Acorn would be attacked. That wasn't the issue. I expected what it turns out Olamina was expecting, which is to say that they would come in and try and take all their shit and burn the place down, which is what they did to Dovetree. They burned the place down. But instead, what they decide to do is come in and take custody and, quote, re-educate. And that was some shit that, like, I should have known was going to be at the root of everything. If they're pretending, if there's this whole like kind of, what's the word I want now? If there is a pretense at being human beings, basically, and a pretense at attempting to coexist, having it be an attempt to like rehabilitate the people that you detest and hate and fear, that really falls in line. But I was operating under the way that things had been going previously, which is to say these like blatant attacks, attempts to murder anybody who disagreed, attempts to just, take them out and turn them into a non-factor anymore. And I just wasn't ready for things to go this way at all. So let's back it up. We see chapter 9 is a start. And it turns out that the name that they go with for their daughter is Larkin. I feel like either Danique told me this before or it's mentioned because it wasn't totally unfamiliar. But I definitely did not remember it. And even when my memory was jogged, when they say it again, I was like, oh, yeah, I guess I remember that. Apparently her name did not make much of an impression on me at all. But Larkin's point of view here, it's made a lot clearer where she's coming from. Because, like, initially in this chapter, in chapter 9, she's kind of talking shit, to be honest. She talks about how her mother admitted she didn't know what she was doing and that she was worried about that, and that her mother wanted more than just for people to like recognize her and admire her. She wanted people to genuinely believe in what they were doing. But then she says, she didn't fight people unless she was pretty sure she was going to win. When she wasn't sure, she found ways to avoid fighting or go along with her opponents until they tripped themselves up or put themselves in a position for her to trip them up. Smart, I suppose, or treacherous, depending on your point of view. She learned from everyone and everything. I think if I had died at birth, she would have managed to learn something from my death that would be useful to Earthseen. So, honestly, she's coming at this from this, like, point of view of like, well, I mean, she's a real tricky bitch in this way that like I find to be kind of she's being hard on Olamina. I mean, Olamina saved her brother and had this community that she built, and therefore had the money to buy him and save him, and brings him home to them. And the man immediately decides to disrespect her shit by coming out here and telling everybody that his sister, who just saved his ass, is wrong and misleading them and full of shit. A fantasy, it's a great nothing. And honestly, in my opinion, Olamina 100% was reasonable in the way that she decided to handle him. She chose to let him do what he asked to do. And while she didn't really want him to, she knew that this wasn't going to be well received and was just like, dude, if you want to push the issue, fine, go ahead. And, you know, she knew that he was going to wind up shooting himself in the foot. But also, I have a hard time believing that he wouldn't have gone and done this anyway, even if she told him no. I have a feeling that he would have, like, found a way to undermine her and preach whatever he felt like preaching in either case. So she kind of did the only thing that she could have done. And I think it's really telling that he, like, goes to Bankole to ask permission and not her. Like, he clearly does not respect her. He does not see how much of this is her doing. And I just don't have a lot of, like, sympathy for the point of view that Larkin is putting forth here, which is like, oh, mom was real tricksy, huh? I mean, yeah, I guess, but also ultimately, I think that she was being kind of charitable in letting him learn his lesson, and he chose not to learn it, and that is not her fucking fault or problem. And not to mention the fact that, like, again, with the fact that he went to Bankole to ask permission rather than her, that is a clear sign that he does not take her seriously as a leader, even though the rest of the community sees her that way. And if he thinks that, I mean, it winds up sort of blowing up in her face because he interprets what went down in a totally different way. But I just think that Larkin is looking at her mother with so much sort of suspicion when her mother was doing the smart thing here. And she says smart, some people might call it treacherous. Those things are not mutually exclusive, and treacherous implies something that's like a little bit more, a little bit more self-serving in a way that is like selfish. And while the choice that Olamina made did wind up being self-serving because it succeeded in fucking up Mark's plan, it was also an attempt to keep the peace with him. It wasn't entirely self-serving, you know? She can see, as she puts it to him later, that this was something important to him. And she tried to work with him on it and compromise. So, I don't know. I think treacherous is way too strong a word, and that Larkin is shown to be pretty unfair here. Now, I say all this, understanding what happens later is hugely influencing the way that Larkin sees her mother. Because shit goes really, really wrong. And it makes total sense that Larkin blames her mom for this, especially considering the way things go between Bankole and Lauren later. And we wind up finding out that, like, basically Larkin never gets to meet her dad. Like, he dies when she is a baby. And all that she has read of his entries is all she's got. So there's a part of you that is never going to be able to forget that your parent made choices that led to this happening. The thing that's so frustrating is that these people would have attacked Acorn either way, whether Olamina was there or not. All of these people, if she had left, would have been taken down without her there, and then she would have had to live with the knowledge that, first of all, the ship was sunk. Second of all, she wasn't even on it when it was sunk. And third of all, she went off to, like, have a better life with her husband and left all of these people to be maybe slaughtered. I can understand Larkin feeling the way she does about being protective of her own father. But I wish that she would think of what it would have done to her mother mentally had they indeed left and everything had gone down anyway, because I think her mother would have fucking lost it. And that is not to say that Olamina might not still lose it. The night is young, but we shall see. So we go into an entry from Olamina, and she's talking about President Jarrett is still stirring things up. He's calling Alaska a bunch of traitors and basically trying to incite people to war. And it's funny because, like, when we see that Alaska has seceded, it didn't even occur to me that Alaska was going to be under attack as a result of this. I kind of felt like it sounded like they had all the power in the situation and therefore could kind of determine what to do because they had the resources and the land that was still like usable because the climate has changed so much. But it didn't really occur to me that, like, well, the rest of, they have like the military power. So whether you've got the resources and everything isn't really the question here. And she says something about, Lauren is like interested in the fact because she thought that the burnings and all of these attacks would start to get worse. And in fact, they haven't. And it's weird that she finds it weird that despite his rhetoric sort of ramping up, that sort of thing hasn't become more common. And I think what happens to Acorn is evidence of why she hasn't heard about that. It's because it hasn't been happening. Instead of burning and killing, they have been occupying. And that is the way that they have chosen to cope with this. So it's not that these people are idle. It's simply that they have changed their tactics and what everybody has been looking for, which would have made them look like the bad guys. They have changed it around to make it like we're just trying to reach out and correct the behavior of others. And while obviously for us, that definitely still looks like the bad guys, that is much better in terms of being available for PR spin. So, and she also mentions that if war were to happen, that the draft sounds like it may be implemented again, which is not something that anybody has seen in their lifetime at this point. So then we have an entry about Mark speaking at the gathering again. And he, again, kind of just falls on his face. Everybody argues with him. And what happens is Mark thinks that she has put everybody up to this, that they aren't coming at him with these questions of their own volition. He thinks that she agreed to let him do his preaching and secretly coached everyone on exactly how to ask questions that he couldn't answer or trip him up or whatever. And it's so typical. It's so typical for an arrogant guy to really believe that the fact that other people are standing up to you or correcting you is part of a conspiracy rather than maybe you didn't think this through well enough and you are not correct in the way you have approached this. And I'm not even trying to argue about the not correct about the religion because that's a whole other issue. But you know, the way that he has decided to come at these people, being beholden to them and their community for his freedom, and yet not respecting any of them at all. And in all fairness, the way it sounds like he talks to them and looks at them and smiles at them sounds extremely patronizing. That ain't it, Chief. You know, like that's not the way to do this. And he just doesn't understand the fact that these people have started to genuinely believe in what she has shared, because he doesn't believe it and he doesn't see the worth in it. So obviously, why would anybody? And that's the it reminds me honestly of when I covered Poisonwood Bible, which I think might be the last book I ever did for the book club, or maybe like second to last. Poisonwood Bible deals with a white man. And, you know, obviously Mark is not that, so it's not the same thing. But it deals with a Christian going into a community that is trying to survive in the way that it has for hundreds of years adapting to the land, and telling them that they are doing it wrong and being really patronizing in the way that he does it. And the people there do not respond well. And the guy who is attempting to convert them all and instruct them in the ways to be a good Christian believes that it's because they don't truly have the faith that they should, and that they are all like kind of at fault, rather than looking at the way he has chosen to approach them. People can sense the condescension. They know that he's full of shit in the way that he talks to them. So of course they do not hear him or take him seriously. But that doesn't even seem to occur to him as a potential reason. It's just, all it is that he can see is that they have chosen to ignore his good advice, and that they should simply recognize that he has the authority to tell them how to live their lives. And that's really the thing that Mark is craving here, is the authority. And I had said last episode that I didn't think Mark agreed with Jarrett. And apparently, Olamina didn't think so either. But as we come to learn here, he does at least a little. Like, he has started to come around and say that he thinks Jarrett's exactly what this country needs, etc., etc. So I was like giving him a lot of benefits of the doubt in terms of the way that he was choosing to approach things initially, thinking that at least he wasn't as bad as Jarrett. But the more this goes on, the more I realize that, like, that seems like precisely what he's trying to do. Actually, he's just masking it initially, but at his heart, he seems to agree. And that's what makes me so worried about the way that that Larkin talks about, I fell in love with him before I even met him. I think that Mark is going to go on to have a career somehow that is publicized and maybe be part of Jarrett's team. And she's going to know him via that. And that is awful. Like, I just hate that idea so much. Ugh. You know, like, I am not excited about this. All of what this means. And I have to be perfectly honest. The fact that Mark left and that these guys showed up right after is highly suspect to me. I don't want to believe that Mark dropped a dime on his own sister and her community of innocent people. But I wouldn't be shocked to find out that's what he did. And I'm just really worried. I really am. Like, this is just so upsetting. So, okay. So when Mark leaves, he leaves with the Peraltas. And the Peraltas were the ones that I believe Esteban was like saying that maybe Jarrett's what the country needs and yada, yada, yada in previous chapters. And they are the ones that think that everybody should be more patriotic, that because Jarrett was elected president and is their leader, that they should respect him anyway, and that he's like been appointed by God kind of thing. I mean, it's the usual shit that you see today on Facebook where people are arguing that, like, you know, he's your president and he doesn't deserve anything. I'm sorry. I don't care what position you hold. It doesn't matter to me. Your actions determine whether you deserve respect. End of story. Position you hold, whether other people think you deserve respect, that holds no bearing to me whatsoever. It just doesn't. So this kind of thinking for me is just truly alien. It is not something that I have ever understood, nor do I think will ever understand. And these people are also like kind of thinking that they need to be acting a little bit more Christian. Like they clearly are feeling a way about how this community has decided to build itself. And there's this moment where they don't believe in the church burnings, witch burnings, and other abuses, as that they don't believe that they are Jarrett's doing. Some of his followers are young and excitable. Jarrett will put their asses into uniform. Then they'll learn some discipline. Jarrett hates all this chaos the way I hate it. That's why I voted for him. Now he'll start putting things right. And this is the thing, like, the thing that kills me is this guy who's saying this is Ramiro Peralta. This is a fucking Hispanic man who thinks that this white Christian is going to be on his side, which is just precious. Like, sweetie, why would you ever think that? Oh my God. But, and then he says he'll put their asses into uniform and then they'll learn some discipline. No, he'll put their asses into uniform and use their sadistic streak of excitability, as you call it, for his own purposes and unleash them on the world. It's just amazing that Ramiro thinks that it's the chaos that Jarrett hates. That's really, like, he's just trying to get things cleaned up. Oh my God, do you not hear him fucking talking? Like, what? But, you know, and this is when she says, it's true there haven't been any burnings or beatings since Jarrett was inaugurated, or none that I've heard of, and I've been paying attention to the news. I don't know what this means, but I don't believe it means that everything is all right. And we wind up finding out precisely what it means. And then she says, I think that the Peraltas realize that if Jarrett's going to crack down, that he is going to come here to Acorn, and they don't need to be here for that. And it turns out that in at least that respect, the Peraltas were dead ass correct. They do not need to be here for this bullshit. So then she talks about the confrontation that she had with Mark and the fact that he says she coached people and how he gave her this like awful smile and says, I forgive you. I might have done the same thing to protect my turf if I had any turf to protect. I think it was the smile that made me say more than I should have. The truth is, I told him, you were given a special privilege. If you were anyone else, you could have been expelled for preaching another belief system. I let you do it because you've been through so much hell and I knew it was important to you. And because you're my brother. I would have called back the words if I could have. He would hear pity in them. He would hear condescension. And she sees him get really angry and sort of clamp down on it and refuse to act on it, which she thinks is like a result of maybe his being a slave and knowing that he has to keep himself in check. But then she reflects on the fact that he's kind of always been extremely self-possessed and contained. And this is one of those moments of relatability for me, that my father was very much like this. He could be very condescending. Oh my God. Siri is out here trying to like, stop it, Siri. But he is, my father was somebody who really clamped down on his anger, but he had this like sort of patronizing, like, oh, I forgive you attitude at times. And the combination is just the most frustrating thing. It's just this like total emotional dishonesty on the one hand, and then the actual emotion that they are feeling, which is plain to see if you know them. They try to smother and behave as if it's not there, and it's just so false. And she tells him, like, I warned you they were going to do this and that you weren't going to be ready for it, and you claimed you were. I don't know what more to tell you. And he says he will make a place for himself somewhere else. And sure enough, she like sets him up with equipment and lets him go. And he doesn't even like apparently thank her for the stuff. Like, they give him money, they give him a gun, they give him ammunition. It's just, you know, it's just really hard to see him like take full advantage while not appreciating anything that is being given to him. And she says that the Peraltas leaving with him, that he kind of wants to be seen as the pastor to the two of them. He wants to be seen as like a authority figure. And it's clear the Peraltas don't really see him that way. They see him as, quote, a nice boy. And as they're all leaving that, the Peraltas look pretty frightened. And she's like, yeah, they kind of should. But Mark is clearly not going to get what he wants out of the Peraltas either. So where is he going to go? How does he manage by himself? So then we go to an entry in which Dan Neuer, who ran away last section, comes back with his sister. This is a huge, like, kind of set piece drama because he and his sister are being pursued by some randoms on the street. And these randoms are one of the first real red flags to me. I maybe, like I said, should have seen the red flag sooner. But these randoms have enough money that it became clear to me they were likely going to have people out there looking for them, and that would lead to Acorn being discovered. They try to keep the attention off of Acorn by like burning the people and their clothing rather than trying to sell them or wear them, because the stuff is like so expensive and distinctive that they know it will be recognized more than likely. So they're trying to like not draw too much attention to themselves. But I think that there's probably, I mean, there were like, what, 5 of them? They are probably leaving a pretty good trail behind them. And they are, you know, I would think part of a bigger group that saw these 2 on their own and came at them. And so part of the group saw them pursue them. And when they didn't return, were able to follow up and figure out where they likely wound up. Especially because one of the shirts is a guy, like, or maybe 2 of the shirts the guys are wearing has one of those white crosses on it. So either they are part of this whole movement, or they are at least in enough agreement as to like posture as though they're part of this movement. So they, like, Dan comes back, his sister, there's this whole thing. I'm not going to get too much into it. But in summary, Dan found both his sisters, and one of them was killed. The other, he was able to save, but Dan himself dies. And it's just so unexpected. Like, first of all, it's unexpected that Dan came back. That right there, when she says Dan came back to us last night, it never even entered my head that he came back with his sister. Then, when I found out that he came back with his sister after all, I was like, well, probably he just found the one alive. No, he found both alive. The other died while they were trying to escape, apparently. And then Dan is the one who dies. And that is just, I just didn't see that coming at all. He sacrificed himself, basically. And they're both in really, really bad shape. Apparently, they have been both sexually assaulted multiple times. They have both been beaten with fists and what Bankole thinks is a whip. They both have rope burns at wrists, ankles, and necks. Nina says she got pregnant, but she had a miscarriage, and she didn't even know it was happening, which is just so horrifying. And it says Dan had somehow found her, rescued her, and brought her home in spite of pursuers chasing him right down into our valley. How had one 15-year-old done so very much? And in the end, what would it cost him? And in the end, it cost him his life. And this is the point when Bankole really talks to Lauren about moving. And it's just like, we need to, like, what are we doing here? This is not a way to live. And he says, 3 men tried to steal her. They got caught. Her owners and the thieves shot it out. This is the one that died, and she was in the middle. Nina says her owners just cursed her for getting in the way and getting killed. They left her body lying among the rocks by the sea. Nina said Paula loved the sea when the family saw it for the first time last year. She said she hoped the tide came in and carried her away. And Lauren is focused mostly on the fact that Dan managed to do something that was essentially impossible and go and find his sisters and bring one of them back. But, you know, yeah, he managed, but also he's dead now. And she just doesn't really want to look at that, which fits in with her character. I mean, there's only so much looking at that you can do without it being just an exercise in futility and growing more and more depressed. So they talk about like dealing with the bodies and the intruders. 4 men and a woman, all in their 20s. They were dirty and scratched up, but well-dressed, well-armed, well-heeled. They had plenty of Canadian money in their pockets. And they just don't really know anything about them. They don't have a change of clothing or ID on them, so that's likely that they like live nearby. And 2 of the intruders were wearing black sweatshirts with white crosses embroidered on them. Embroidered, not printed. These weren't the long tunics that Aubrey Dovetree mentioned, but they were interesting imitations. The intruders' guns are, like our own, good quality, well-cared-for automatic rifles with laser sights. And she goes into great detail about them and that they're super illegal, but they're also extremely common. So then, 10. Life at Acorn involved a lot of hard physical work, and this is from Larkin's POV. It says a great deal about the world of the early 2030s that most of the people who stumbled onto the community chose to join Earthseed and stay. That being the case, it must have taken a lot to get the Peralta family to leave. There may have been more reasons than my mother gives for their leaving, but I haven't been able to find evidence of them. Perhaps the Peraltas actually did disagree with the religious and political feelings of the rest of Acorn. Perhaps also they were afraid of the way the political situation in the country was going. They had reason to be. On the other hand, I'm not at all surprised that Uncle Mark left. There really was no place for him at Acorn. He was Olamina's little brother, a nice boy. And I got the impression my mother didn't pay much attention to being pregnant. It wasn't that she resented it. It was just that she ignored it, which is interesting. I mean, based on what we have read, that doesn't seem incorrect. She doesn't mention the fact that she's pregnant very often. You know, she doesn't seem hyper aware of it. It may just be that she had an easy pregnancy, and some women are lucky enough to have that. So then she talks about how they begin to get successful enough that they are able to invest in another truck. And they are able to expand their business in a way that makes people feel a lot more secure, because having just the one truck, if anything happens, it all goes to hell. But now if they have 2, they're really going to manage to, you know, be able to cover themselves. And she talks about how her mother was fantasizing about different other Earthseed communities and their names being like other versions of tree nuts, hazelnut, manzanita, sunflower. I guess that's not a tree nut, but almond. They should be small communities, no more than a few hundred people, never more than 1,000. A community whose population grew to more than 1,000 should split and parent a new community. In small communities, she believed, people are more accountable to one another. Serious misbehavior is harder to get away with, harder even to begin when everyone who sees you knows who you are, where you live, who your family is, and whether you have any business doing what you're doing. And this is one of those things where I'm like, I totally understand that point of view. And I think in some ways that's true. But unfortunately, because of like human nature, you get into a place then where people are zeroing in too much on what everyone around them is doing. And they don't mind their fucking business is really what it comes down to. But in a community like this where you're still struggling to survive, how much of a hindrance is that really? It's not until things really begin to settle and people have the spare time to be judgmental that then that might begin to be a problem. So we go to the birth of Larkin, which is, it's so weird. Lauren was born on her father's birthday, and Larkin is born on both their birthdays. They all share a birthday, July 20th, which is really, really strange. I really like, there's a part of me that's like, is this supposed to be like some sort of resurrection, or what's it called when somebody is born into the body of somebody else? Like it reminds me of, you know, the Dalai Lama and how they believe that he is like the same soul reborn over and over again into a body that they just have to sort of track down, except it's not even a body that they have to track down. It's like that person's child, which is that's just crazy to me. So she talks for a while about choosing her name, and that they wound up having to use Bancole's mother's name, Beryl, as one of the many names that they had wound up giving her. And that even though Beryl is terrible, it's also like it means a stone that can be shined up and made really beautiful. And that it's not like the meaning of it isn't too terrible, and that probably when her daughter grows up, she will get rid of a bunch of these names and just settle on a couple of them to really keep and use. Which I kind of like that, actually, as an approach. You know, there's a lot of people who talk about maybe waiting to name children until it feels like you've got a sense of their personality and then giving them a name that suits them. And while that does seem like a little bit difficult, like just in practical senses, not naming a child is difficult, you know, and being able to talk about the child and register the child, like you need a name. But I do like the idea of giving a kid so many names that all have a very different vibe to them, that eventually that kid can choose out of that handful of names. And it's still something that their parents gave them that they can hold on to that's meaningful. But it will be something that they chose that feels particularly meaningful to them as well. I think that's kind of interesting. And Lauren writes for a while about how Bankole is just obviously so thrilled to have a daughter, and how he is almost probably unaware of how much he is glowing and smiling as he walks around during the day now, because he's just like thinking about her. And he tells Lauren at one point that he feels like she saved him, because he really kind of felt like his life was over and that was it. And now he has been able to like build a family and have a child, which he had been unable to do with his first wife. And he just has so much that he didn't have. And he's really frustrated that, as he puts it, she will not let him save her back. And that leads to this whole conversation, but I will get to that in a second. There's this interesting thing about like this guy who built Bankole's rocking chair, and who used to really like obviously be threatened by him and acted like he just didn't like him, but really it was obvious that it was just like the guy was a little bit insecure. And eventually Bankole wound up like saving the dude's wife and child when she was in labor, and he made this rocking chair as a sort of peace offering, and now they pretty much get along. So they welcome Larkin into the community, and they make Harry and Zara change sister and change sister and brother to them, and change aunt and uncle to their children, which is their version of godmother and godfather. I think it's a little bit clumsy. Change aunt and uncle. Like, I feel like there must be a better way to have that name work, but that's what they are. So Bankole, when he finally talks to Olamina about this, he is really trying to walk that line of being supportive and not like dismissive of her goals and ideas, but also trying to appeal to her practical side and her responsible side. Because he feels essentially that Lauren is indulging, I think, in this fantasy about what Earthseed is, rather than doing what is smart and right as a parent. And it's really hard to like listen to him trying to balance these two approaches. He still believed that we should leave Acorn, that we would be safe only in a bigger, richer, longer established town. Convince me, he was saying. I want what's happening, I said. I want us to go on growing, becoming stronger, richer, educating ourselves and our children, improving our community. Those are the things we should be doing for now and for the near future. As we grow, I want to send our best, brightest kids to college and to professional schools so they can help us and in the long run help the community, the country, the world to prepare for the destiny. At the same time, I want to send our believers who have missionary inclinations send them in family groups to begin Earthseed gathering houses in non-Earthseed communities. They'll teach, they'll give medical attention, They'll shape new Earthseed communities within existing cities and towns, and they'll focus the people around them on the destiny. And she goes on like this for a while, and is kind of like startled at the fact that she is able to share these like goals at all, because it's stuff that she has barely really been able to like admit to herself are her desires. And she says that she isn't sure if maybe it was a mistake to say all of it out loud. Problem was, we've been focused so long on immediate survival, and I've worried about scaring people off with too many big plans. Worst of all, I've worried about it seeming ridiculous. We are a beginning, I said, thinking as I spoke. It's as though Earthseed is only an infant like Larkin. And we'd be so easy to stamp out. That's why we have to grow and spread, to make ourselves less vulnerable. And he tries to be like, but if you went to Halstead, and she says, if I went to Halstead, the seed here might die. Babe, I'm no more likely to leave Acorn now than I am to leave Larkin. And she says that seemed to rock him back a little. I don't know why, after all that I've already said. Well, I know why. Because it's one thing to say that you are committed to a cause, and another thing to compare that cause to your own child, whom he has a direct, like, love and interest in as well. This isn't like you are trying to get him to understand something that he cannot relate to at all. And then you put it in the context of something that he can fully relate to. And for him to realize that this is that serious to you is the kind of connect that you needed for him to really grasp the full import of what you're trying to explain. It's like, it's one of the oldest methods I have found of being able to get somebody to see what you're talking about. And it works in reverse too. Like, for example, Owen and I talk about the ways in which we each perceive our chores around the house. And he will get very upset if the lawn is in bad shape. And I have just never been somebody who really cares about that sort of thing. And we were talking about it one day and how, like, we were having people over and he really wanted to go take care of the lawn. And I was like, yeah, but don't you care more about, like, the living room and that being neat? And he's like, babe, to me, the lawn is basically the living room that everybody can see as they drive by. And all he had to do was put it in those, like, terms, and all of a sudden I understood why it was so important to him, that he sees it like I always see it as, what, it's just the grass outside, but he sees it as an extension of our home that gives an impression the way that the inside of our home gives an impression. And all of a sudden I totally got it, when previous I was just like, what the hell, who cares? So he mentions Jarrett and, you know, watching out for what's going on there. And she tries to say that, like, we'll watch him, we'll change and maybe adapt, maybe get quieter for a while. If we have to start saying long live Jarrett and God bless Christian America, then we'll say it. And she does not know how completely 100% that actually is going to happen, that she will be forced to do those very things. And she says, this is a good point, even if we go to Halstead, Jarrett is still going to be an issue, and we are going to be the newbies in this community at Halstead. They aren't going to feel the urge to stand up for us because we're going to be sort of new. So what's the, you know, I don't really get why you think that getting out of here is going to save us when we'll be just as vulnerable, but just in a very different way somewhere else. I would rather be in a place where I'm surrounded by my friends who feel loyalty to us as a family than around a bunch of people who only feel the loyalty they do to you as a doctor, and that's about as far as it goes. So, you know, she has a point there. And then she talks about how her father didn't believe in the space program and that it was a waste of money. And Bencole says he was right. And she gets really irritated. And I have to admit, I got a little irritated here too. Do I believe in what she's talking about like spreading among the stars? Not really. I personally am of the opinion that the human race should not be spreading itself anywhere. that we have fucked up our own planet and we don't get to just leave it and go somewhere else and fuck that up too. We have to take responsibility for the planet that we have ruined and fix that shit and become responsible rather than continuing to do the damage that we have done here somewhere else. However, he knows, Bankole knows that this is incredibly important to her and like a key cornerstone of the whole concept of Earthseed. So for him to say that to her in this moment just felt really thoughtless and shitty. So she said, early on when I told people about the destiny and most of them laughed, I was afraid. I worried I couldn't do this. Later, when the people of Acorn began to accept all the Earthseed teachings, accept the destiny, I worried more. People seemed to be willing to believe all kinds of stupid things, but I couldn't get them to believe in something real, that they could make real with their own hands. Now, most of the people here accept the destiny. They believe me and follow me, and damned if I don't worry even more. I believe in Earthseed, yet I doubt my own abilities. And I really like this because he says, do you think anybody expects you to know everything? And she's like, yeah, I do. I know that they intellectually know I can't know everything. And that if I did know everything, they'd resent that likely as well. But I definitely do think they expect that 100%. And honestly, I get that. It's a weird thing when things begin to work out for you and it's something that you care about and are impassioned about, how much more scary it can be once it begins to work out and you begin to feel like you have maybe a little bit of power and influence and you really just are kind of making it up. I feel that way with the show. I mean, this is obviously a much smaller scale thing, but there are a lot of times where people will be like, well, I know that you're a professional, and I have to stop and be like, I mean, I guess I am. I'm making a living on this now, but I don't feel like I can accept that label. And I just get really sort of touchy about it at times where I don't feel like I get worried about people looking to me for advice and stuff when I feel like I am just fucking making it up as I go along, you know? So this is the moment when he says, like, I will likely not live long enough to see the fruit of your efforts. And she gets really startled by that. And he's like, you know, and you might not either. And she says, well, if I can't make it happen, and maybe Larkin can. And she manages to say it, but it is really like a bit of a panic for her to realize that now she has like another human being that could maybe carry things on for her, and that this has grown so big enough it may cross generations, and also to come to terms with the idea that she may not see her own success, that might not happen within her lifetime. And I think about that all the time with different people who have fought for things that they died before they got to actually see, and they were instrumental in the creation of change, but they didn't actually get to be part of the change. And I find that to be one of the biggest tragedies. You know, it's like they are heroes for starting us down these paths, and they never got to reap the benefits of all of the work that they put in. They simply had to get the ball rolling. And it's just a tough thing to come to terms with, that you can believe in something and be instrumental and die without having succeeded. And that doesn't mean that you failed, but it sure means that you won't know whether you failed or not by the time you're dead, you know? So he says something about how they need to make this place more of a town. And they have this like really kind of kind, sweet moment between the two of them. And then we get the next chapter. I'm not certain how to write about the next episode in my parents' lives and in my life. I'm glad to have no memory of it. I was only 2 months old when it happened. It's all very strange, very bad, very confused. If only my mother had agreed to go with my father to live peacefully, normally in Halstead, it wouldn't have happened. Or at least, it wouldn't have happened to us. And that's the thing. It wouldn't have happened to us. It would have happened to everybody else. Your father would still be alive. But it would have happened to you anyway, because Olamina would have taken it very hard. And not only that, but I just can't, like, the fact that she doesn't even remember it because she was so young and apparently it was over before she was old enough to really process. And that's what I'm clinging to here. That, to me, is like all she wishes is that her father had survived. But I can't help but wonder how things ended. Because if Olamina was instrumental in them getting out of this, then she's low-key wishing that they had left with her father and that everyone had been left to their own devices to figure out their own way out of it. And, you know, I mean, not a great look, but also a completely understandable look. So then we get the description from Lauren, and it starts off with, they didn't shoot their way in. It seems that they didn't intend to kill us, or they don't yet. Things have changed, and they have acquired a shadow of sophistication. Roaring in, shooting everyone, and burning everything is perhaps too crude for them now, or maybe it's just not as much fun. And she says that she's writing in secret and storing the papers somewhere else because they haven't yet robbed them of everything. They've taken away weapons and that kind of thing. But as far as like paper and writing utensils, they have not really thought to worry about that. And she has been hiding it all after she finishes writing for the day where they can't find it. And I don't know where that is. It's not described yet. But she says that I must hide this record so that someday Earthseed will know what Earthseed has survived. We will do that. We will survive. I don't yet know how. How is always a problem. But in fact, we will survive. Here is what happened. So she's drawing a couple of the kids. She had been teaching herself to draw and has gotten a lot better at it. And all of a sudden, she hears the sound of these armored tanks. They're like less than a tank, but they are really big, and they're called maggots. And it says private cops and military people use them, and people with plenty of money drive them as private cars. Maggots can go almost anywhere, over, around, or through almost anything. The people of Halstead have one. They've used it now and then to collect bankole. Several small local towns have one or two for their cops or for search and rescue in the hills, but the things are serious fuel eaters, expensive to run. That Friday, 7 maggots came crawling out of the hills and through our thorn fence toward us. There had been no warning from the watchers, nothing at all. That was my first thought when I saw them coming. Where were Lucio Figueroa and Noricos Cardos? Why hadn't they warned us? Were they all right? And I'm guessing, because, you know, I don't know if we actually get updates on what happened to them, that they were gassed. Because that's what happened to everybody. But they have a bug out plan. And everybody is supposed to, like, grab the stuff. Like, they have, like, some of them have bags. They at least have caches of supplies that are, like, hidden around. They are all planning to spread out and run in different directions and not group together because these tanks have the ability to automatically zero in on targets. Now, I kind of had skipped over the recovery of Dan and his sister in the previous chapter because it was a lot of just description of this like battle. But there was something really important in that section, which is the description of the armored house truck and the way it works. It is extremely advanced. Now, I don't know that this is more advanced than anything we have now, or if, you know, the author was writing this based on what we currently have in our arsenal in the present. But the house truck is able to, first of all, it can take fingerprints and retinal scans and voice recognition so that it recognizes people. But it can also like take facial scans and scans their bodies in different positions so that they can detect if any of the people outside are part of their own team and zero in on shooting only the people who are not part of their own team, which is bonkers. So that's what they're kind of up against more than likely with these fucking maggots. They have sensory equipment too. I assume it works the same way. So they have to spread out and make sure that there isn't like one consolidated target. the idea was not to waste time running around looking for relatives. Except for babies and very young children, everyone knew from the drills that a command to get out meant exactly that. Get out now. And we were to go in all directions. We were not to follow one another. We were to put trees and geographical features between ourselves and the enemy. But what were we to do when the enemy was everywhere? And all of a sudden, these maggots begin to fire, and she realizes that they're not firing bullets, they're firing gas. And the gas brings them all down hard. It doesn't even knock them out. It just causes them to lose control of their bodies. So they're no longer able to run. They can blink. Their eyes are open. They can still sense and see and hear what's going on around them. But they don't have physical control, and they do not have a sense of touch. So Lauren gets gripped up and dragged over the ground, but she can't actually feel the ground underneath her. She just feels her body moving against rocks and stuff, and she knows later that's going to hurt like a motherfucker. But in the moment, she can't feel anything. So it's clearly some sort of like neurological toxin. So they get thrown into the schoolhouse and separated from the men and from the very young children. And this is really what's causing the biggest like terror for a lot of these women, is that their babies have been taken away, and they have no idea what they're doing with the babies or why they are being kept separate from the men. I had assumed that they were being kept separate so that these guys could just come in and rape all the women, and you know, they would have them separate from the men so that they wouldn't have to worry about fighting them. But they are not raped in this section. They all assume that that is coming. I also assume that is coming, but who knows? Because there's something about the way these men are functioning that seems to be a little bit different. So I wouldn't be surprised if like they don't get raped, but there are some other like, because they have like, you know, a more of a moral code. And I say that with a huge eye roll, but also that they find other ways to torment and sexually abuse these women that are either more covert or more masked in some sort of like pure intention, you know? So everybody is basically absolutely like in a panic. Gray, who seems to know that they are going to be putting slave collars on them all, goes and gets himself killed on purpose. He goes and like does something that causes an explosion, and she believes that he chose to die. He uses the house truck to kill as many of them as he can, and then drives the truck directly into one of the maggots, and it explodes, which it should not have done, which is why she thinks that that was purposeful. He did something and rigged something up. Understandable, dude. He had already been through this, and he hadn't even worn one of those slave collars. And while they're all down, and like, honestly, like I said, I didn't think that we were going to see our main character have to wear one of these things. I really didn't. I didn't think so. I thought we were going to hear it. It was going to, because like the first book, she is spared so much of the horror that other people, like, she has not been raped. Her family has been killed, but she hasn't had to suffer through a lot of what other people have. And I just kind of thought that that was a theme that would continue. And apparently her luck has kind of run out. So she sees Bankole and she sees him blink. But later on, we find out that Bankole is dead. And that causes her to wind up getting some, as she calls them, lashes with the slave collar, because she goes after one of the guys with her fucking pickaxe. Because she and, I'm trying to remember who it was, the other one, Allie maybe, are brought outside to dig graves. Zara dies. And it's unclear exactly what happened. It seems like this gas kind of affects everybody differently. So I'm assuming that if you are older, like maybe that was what happened with Bankole as well, it affects you more. If you are weaker, it affects you more. But I don't know exactly what the deal was with Zara. And yeah, she and Allie are like told. There's this moment, I'm trying to find it, because they have this long thing with everybody like trying to get their acts together and calm down and figure out what they're going to do. And one of the girls, let's see, Teresa, I think it is, right? Yeah, Teresa Lynn says, the window is open. I can see the stars. I'm getting out of here. And she jumps up over the window and immediately begins screaming. And it becomes really clear going anywhere near the windows or anywhere near the doors causes extreme pain. And they just leave Teresa out there. And she goes on screaming and screaming and screaming until eventually she can only kind of croak. And there is nothing they can do to help her. And none of the other guys go out there to help her. And eventually she dies. But it's not really like, it's not clear. Like clearly the collar somehow killed her. But it's not clear if the collar was meant to be killing her or if she kind of cracked because of the physical pain that it was causing her. I'm not sure how that works. So, yeah, that is the first warning that they get about how this all works. And eventually the captors come over and tell them that they need to dig these holes. And when she points to Zara, Allie does. Let's see. Oh, no, sorry, Olamina does. He lashes her for speaking without being spoken to. And later, Allie tries to help her up, and then she gets lashed. And he says, you do what you're told and only what you're told. You don't touch one another. Whatever filth you're used to, it's over. It's time for you to learn to behave like decent Christian women if you've got the brains to learn. And she says, so that was it then. We were a dirty cult of free lovers, and they had come to straighten us out and educate us. Which makes complete sense that they would, like, see this community and just assume that, like, well, you know, they're not Christians, so obviously this must be some sort of, like, sex cult. It can't just be that these people are like, trying to live their lives in peace and avoid the fucking horror show that is the world. No. There has to be something that's, like, perverse going on as well. Of course, it could just be as simple as a lesbian relationship, and apparently that would be seen as perverse, so the threshold is quite low. But nevertheless, this gives them a clue, because really what Olamina emphasizes to all of the women in this scene is that they need to keep their cool and keep their eyes open, figure out exactly what these people are actually after, and then behave as if they are giving it to them, because they need to bide their time, and they can't be seen as incalcitrant and bring a bunch of suffering upon themselves. And as this, like, scene progresses with her digging the hole, she realizes that submission, as she puts it, was no protection. He kept hurting me even though I had shown no signs of rebellion. Was he enjoying himself? He didn't smile as he hurt me, but he did keep hurting me. So, yeah, it's a pretty horrifying scene. And when she goes after the guy with her pickaxe, he lashes her so hard with this collar that she winds up just straight up passing out. And that is the end of chapter 11. And I just sat there for a minute after reading this like, Jesus fucking Christ. I mean, it is just, guys, it is a lot. This is brutal. And I mean, I have come across other stuff that's like objectively more horrifying in its way, like in Broken Earth. But there is a certain imagination to that is so, because of the science fiction aspect, that I can focus on that a little bit and keep myself fascinated by it and in its way entertained by it enough that it doesn't feel quite so bleak. But this was too close to home. This was too real and too grounded in our world. And it just really, I was in a bad place after reading this, I got to admit, for like probably an hour after. And when Owen finally came home and I told him I was reading something that had upset me and I tried to explain it to him, I got like halfway into my description and he held his hands up and was like, you got to stop talking about this with me, babe. I'm sorry, but I can't take it. This is so depressing. And I was like, I know. So yeah, here's hoping that the next section, there is a glimmer of hope, but I'm not thinking that's going to happen quite yet. We shall see. I'm over time, so I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you very much to Danique for commissioning this, but also I hate you, Danique, and go to hell. But also thank you, but I hate you. All right, I'm going to wrap it. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.